Recording in progress.
I now call this General Committee meeting to order. Welcome to our General Committee meeting for September the 13th, 2023. This meeting is being held in person and electronically in accordance with the Municipal Act. The first item on the agenda is the consent agenda. For the consent items, I'll read out the title associated with the recommended motions printed on the agenda. Members of General Committee may ask that an item be held to discuss the matter further. If an item is not held, the motion is deemed to be approved on consent. No further discussion of the item will take place at General Committee, and the recommended motions will go forward to the next City Council meeting for consideration. The first item is DEV 039-23, Zoning Bylaw Amendment Application, Barry Yonge Developments GP Inc., 447, 449, 451, 453, 455 Yonge Street.
Hold, please.
I'll recognize the ward councillor, and it's held. The next item on the agenda is DEV 040-23, Zoning Bylaw Amendment Application, Barry Yonge Developments GP Inc. Hold, please. That's held by Councillor Harvie. What's the concern?
Hang on, which one are we on here? You're on the second one.
DEV 040-23.
No. Same one, yeah, hold please.
Yeah.
Hold.
Yeah.
Cares?
There's double.
Oh,
Yeah.
It was double printed.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Yeah. The next item is DEV 042-23, extension to the temporary use bylaw to permit agricultural use, 15 Harvie Road, Barry Brine Developments Limited, Ward 9.
That's you here.
Ward
That's
9,
your-
Ward
it's not
7,
Ward-
yeah.
that's Ward 7, yeah.
That one's a hold, please.
Thank you, Councillor Harvie. The next item is DEV 043-23, Zoning Bylaw Amendment 101 to 119, Bay Lane Estates Limited in Ward 8. That's approved. It's our first approval of the night. That's great. The next one is Rec 003-23, AAA under 18 dressing room facility agreement. That's approved on consent. The next item is an item for discussion, 8.1, invitation to present to Council the Royal Victoria Regional Health Centre. The representatives from the RVH Health Centre be invited to provide a presentation to City Council this fall, put on by Deputy Mayor Robert Thompson. And that is approved on consent. We will now go back to Councillor Harris for DEV 039-23. We'll only have this debate once, okay? Not twice. So over to you, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Noddle. I apologize for the slight delay. I think as those who are here, put this on the floor as printed, pardon me. For those of you who are here and have been following this, we see it as one. I mean, so although there's two, we certainly see these Yonge Street at McLaren applications as connected. So I first off want to begin by thanking Ms. Banfield and Mr. Butler, Ms. McLaren, the staff who've been involved in this file. There's been a great deal of collaboration, investment in time to answer questions, and certainly from both myself and from residents, and so I appreciate that. And for members of council, I'm sure certainly that you're aware after receiving been contacted by residents that their position is that council not support the recommendations in this report. Like all development applications, there are a number of parties and they have their own interests and perspectives, and sometimes they align and sometimes they don't. And it's the residents that border this proposed development on Yonge Street that I ask you to consider their interests. The rejection to the recommendations is rooted in two key policy areas, density and conformity, informed by consultation with the planning professionals. With regard to density, at a density of 323 units per hectare, where the target for an intensification corridor is 50 units per hectare. It is respectfully presented that this does not comply with the density standard of the official plan. And with regards to compatibility and supporting stable neighborhoods, it's also offered that a 7-story building next to single-family detached homes is not compatible, and that addressing this discrepancy through landscaping and site details is not adequate and does not effectively provide an appropriate transition to lower density. So certainly as this process evolves, there's opportunity for residents in the community to share the details of what this proposal and recommendation means to them. But in simple and straightforward terms, as we look at the policy and respectfully assess it, the recommendation that's been presented is not in favor. The residents are not in favor of this, and I certainly respect their thoughts on this and wishes. So I would ask council to consider this as they deliberate their vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. And I also wanted to recognize there's an individual here this evening. And, sir, I know that's been said to you. I just want to make sure publicly that you do have the opportunity to speak. It's not tonight. Will be the deputation process next week. Okay? And that's either for or against whatever's decided. You can vote. You can speak for or against next week. Okay? I'm going to move on to Councillor Corser.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to staff, I just had a question on under the department and agency comments on the same issue. The Simcoe County District School Board comment was Simcoe County District School Board provided a comment of no objection to the proposal, however noted that pupils residing in this development may not be accommodated in local schools due to accommodation limits. I just wanted to informationally ask more details and explanation on that comment, please.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Corser. So ultimately, that's a comment, a very standard comment that the school board makes, in particular in these infill developments where someone may see a school in the neighborhood and think if they purchase a home in that development, that their child will go to that school. And that just isn't always the case, depending on capacity limits. So the school board really just flags this for people to say, of course your pupil will be housed in a school, but it may not be the one you actually see. So they just really want people to be aware of that.
Thank you. And just a follow-up comment of all the things that we have to look at, traffic reports, impacts on community and surrounding neighborhoods. It's just another piece of the puzzle that is so many important pieces that we have to look at when making decisions. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corser. And our conversations with the school board keep going on many subjects. Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Through you to staff, I have been reached out to by some of the residents and some of the concerns, and I think what it comes down to is an interpretation of the policy. And just doing a little bit of research after receiving a few calls, I looked at the density level. So this is probably more of a comment, but just to correct me if I'm wrong, because like if we reduce the density, it wouldn't 100% guarantee the reduction in the footprint, correct?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Deputy Mayor Thompson, that is correct. The unit count in the built form could potentially decrease through different sizes of units, but that wouldn't necessarily change the built form.
Okay, and just to follow up, Mayor Nuttall, so I did a little bit of driving around the city yesterday, just to see, the compatibility of single-family homes to high-rise, 7 stories, and I don't even know if that's classified as a high-rise or a mid-rise. Now, if I own the single-family home behind, it's a high-rise to me, and whatever the definition is. But so I looked at some of the older sites that we had, 2 and 6 Toronto Street, You know, there's a lot of bungalows in the neighborhood. I think of some of the approvals in years gone by, Hamner, Dunlop Street. Is there a few more that, like?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Deputy Mayor Thompson, there are many, many applications for intensification across the city, in particular since around the 2010, 2012, 2014, when these intensification policies were established.
Perfect. Just another question. So, if, I'm trying to think how to word this. You know what, it's general committee. I'll let others speak, and then I want to word it in a certain way. So let me think about, and I'll move it along, and I can speak after if somebody else doesn't speak of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Councillor Morales, it is your turn.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Mayor Nuttall, I miss the days where we used to, in friendly, say, my neighborhood's better than yours. We have a park, we're more traditional. Those were good days. Because you know what the days that are now here? We're fighting about keeping people out of our neighborhoods. I'm not trying to be dramatic, I'm not trying to get a one-liner. That literally just came to me. I have notes, you'd be surprised. And that just came to me, hearing about the changes. To go what Deputy Mayor Thompson did, he got a couple. I'll say the list. We have policies in place. It's really frustrating for me, and I'll personalize it for myself. When we have residents who don't want change, when the policy is in support of their thing, they say stick to the policy. When the policy supports more change than is comfortable, they say think of the policy that used to be in place, because maybe that one was more restrictive. When they say, when it encourages to go on intensification corridor, they say, stay to the spirit of it. So those are a little bit challenging for me. And I'll go through the list around the city in no specific order. 444 ESSA, Mayor Nuttall, in Ward 6, 9 stories, approved. And I'm not going to cover ones that are currently at public meeting, or the one from today, or even, I'm not even going to cover the ones in Greenfield secondary plan with no neighbors in sight. Not going to cover those. Dean Avenue in Ward 9, right beside a 5-story seniors complex. And they're very proud people, as you know. And single detached homes, 14 meters across the street. 4 stories in the front, 6 stories in the middle, 9 stories in the back. They came in at 13 initially, by the way, and I pushed for the staggering. 681 in Ward 9, already built across from St. Peter's High School, 7 stories on Yonge Street. Same amount of 5 lanes, same width, same context, and also between 2 GO stations. Nothing unique about this part of Yonge Street. 669 Yonge Street, 4 weeks ago, approved, 11 stories. Hammer Street in Ward 4, backing directly onto a 2-story townhouse, not even a 3-story townhouse, directly. There is no buffer, there's no catwalk, there's no park. 10 stories. 37 Johnson in Ward 1, only approved because the appeal board mandated it. 11 stories, not even on an arterial. I believe Johnson is a collector of sorts. And Georgian Drive, an arterial, not an intensification corridor, 17 stories already approved in Georgian Drive. Mayor Nuttall, the reason I go through the list a little bit more dramatically than Deputy Mayor Thompson is it's no longer about not in my backyard. It's getting to the point where it's not in your backyard. And that being, this is a land of an application we've seen that's taking a number of end-of-life homes and trying to create more units of livability for more people, for more neighbors, for more Barrie residents, for people to settle down. If you're seniors and you want to downsize and you want to stay in the city, if you want to, for millennials who want to, and millennials aren't exactly young anymore. I believe they can be anywhere between late 20s to 40s, that they want to create a life in Barrie, or for anybody in between. So, Mayor Nuttall, the reason I'm voting in favor of this is it's a provincial highway. I looked at the specific documents and it says Kings Highway 11. So when we have to address the fact that this is an intensification corridor and housing prices have changed. And we have rents now starting with 2,000, Mayor Nuttall, not 1,000, not for premium units, not with a waterfront view on the water. This is something we have to do. Now, specifically, I want to ask maybe a couple of questions to Ms. Banfield, Mayor Nuttall. Ms. Banfield, there's been some talk about transition policies. It's my understanding, and I'll let you take it wherever you want. It's my understanding transitions policies exist, but only between types of uses. So that it means from a commercial use to a residential, or from industrial to residential. There are transition policies, but I just want you to be able to just clarify that. Through you, Mayor Nuttall.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Morales, I would say there's actually two factors to it. I would say there's the land use piece, the transition between land use, and in this case, it's residential to residential, so there is no difference. People live in both buildings, or propose to live. There definitely is a transition between built forms that have to be contextually looked at. And in this case, that's where you do take a look at some of the changes that the applicant has made to the built form piece with an increased setback, bringing it closer to Yonge Street, actually reducing, taking one story off. Paragraph 19 of the staff report does a good job talking about that. So I'd say transition is twofold. The land use piece is not an issue in my mind. It's the same. And then the transition piece that you might talk about from a built form perspective has been addressed through the design of the site.
Perfect. Mayor Nuttall, the other question I wanted to ask is, and it can be a quick answer if you want. If you want to make it longer, make it longer. I just want to confirm, I know the answer, but obviously some individuals came here to be at a public meeting, so we'll get the answers in the public sphere. Is it accurate and correct that an intensification corridor can be up to 8 stories and or 25 meters on an intensification corridor, specifically Yonge Street?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councilor Morales, 8 stories is permitted, correct?
Perfect. And if members of council might recall in the paperwork we've gotten through his file, they came in with a building and townhouses that had direct and which were much closer to the existing single detached neighborhood. Is that correct, Ms. Banfield?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councilor Morales, correct.
And is it correct that the townhouse strip built form has been eliminated from their current submission?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councilor Morales, correct.
Perfect. So, Mayor Nuttall, for those reasons, I want to go back to the days where we used to say that, you know, the East End had these quirks and Hallandale had these quirks and Painswick had this. But we're past those days. When rents start with 2,000 and people have just given up on buying, on forming families, on accepting the fact that roommates are just a part of life, that's not a bear I want to live in. But unfortunately, based on the criteria and the policies that our staff have interpreted correctly, because they're clear, I will be voting in favor of this file.
Thank you, Councilor Morales. I now have Councilor Riepma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, thanks to staff for a thoughtful report. And I think for sure there's no question that we, as a city, need to look at increasing densities, and with increasing densities is going to come increasing heights. And I think that we have done that to a large extent already. Some of the buildings have been mentioned, but I think also in the downtown area we've really focused height and density, and also at the southern GO station as well. And I think that fits with where provincial policy is taking us. And we need to have more density to make use of infrastructure that we have, to make our transit system work better, all of those kinds of things. And we definitely need to build a city that is available for everybody. But at the same time, we also need to build a community. And I think that it's not only dealing with height and density, but it has to do with the feel of the community and the humanness and the human scale of it. When this came forward, I spent some time the other day walking the neighborhood and driving up and down the area, and just to get a sense of what it's like there. I am going to defer to the local councillor because he has a lot more experience in this area, and I don't want to be superimposing my ideas there. But it seems to me that the highest building that is in this area is less than half of the proposed height here. I think they're in this area. There really are sort of 3 stories, that kind of height, and I think that this proposal is more than twice that high. I don't fault staff for their report. I think we have our policies. I think there's a question of interpretation. I think that there are some issues that I have in terms of a proposal that would be about 6 times as dense as what is recommended in the official plan. I think there's some interpretations around that. I think the transition questions are there. I think there's no question that there's going to be intensification on this site. I think the question really becomes is how do we make this, whatever is going to happen there, fit into the community, both as it exists today and as we foresee it in the future. I think that this one is, at this point, too high, and I think that we really need to go back to the drawing board and try to figure it out in a much better way than where we're at today. So I'll leave it at that, but at this point, I'm not in support of the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Riepma. Are there any other, Councillor Courser?
I just wanted to ask a question through you, Mayor Nuttall, to, I'm assuming, Ms. Banfield. There was a list of developments that have been approved that was tossed around the table this evening. Some I voted on, some I did not, prior to my time at council. But each one of those proposals, developments came through for a public meeting, they came through general committee for discussion, and they were voted on by council, correct? As individual projects.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Courser, that's correct.
So just a comment that I think that it's important for us to weigh each individual project that comes to our table and not reflect upon just because we can, we should, and we did before, so we're going to. I think it's important that we actually weigh each individual development on its merits, and as opposed to saying, well, we've done it before, so we can do it again. It doesn't cookie cutter across the city for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Courser. I'm going to move on to Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Nuttall. I'm going to just add my 2 cents because I know this is kind of a controversial one and it's a tough one. And I think, you know, staff and Councillor Harris have done a great job trying to appease some of the residents' concerns. As Ms. Bansfield had pointed out, you know, reducing from 8 to 7 stories, removal of the townhouses, as Councillor Morales pointed out. So for me, I get a little bit nervous when we start, I think, talking a bit more based on emotions and creating these exemptions based on emotions and pleas from our residents. I think it's a really difficult position to be in, so I don't envy you, Councillor Harris. But I think at the end of the day, we've got to make decisions based on the policies that we have in place. And for me, going through all of this, and this was a great report, I also had a number of calls from concerned residents as well. So I did the drive-bys, I did the walkthroughs, I drive by this area quite frequently anyway. But we can't get away from the fact that Yonge Street is an intensification corridor. It is what it is. It was back in the 2010 official plan, and it is now in the current plan as well. And there was plenty of opportunity for consultation during that period as well for residents. I know Duckworth, I think, was changed actually from an intensification corridor. It was removed. So this is the direction we're heading. We've signed a housing pledge. I think for every resident that speaks out against it, you're going to have 100 more crying out for further density and more housing. So this is this is tough, and I do feel for the residents. I do understand the concerns and where they're coming from, and as I said, I do think we've done a pretty good job at trying to appease some of those and finding some compromises. So I do commend staff for actually listening and taking those into consideration in this final report. But at the end of the day, for me, I'm going to have to make decisions based on policy, based on the frameworks that we have in place. Otherwise, I think we run a really slippery slope if every single application we get, and I agree with you, we have to judge them all individually, but if we're not referring back to our policies and frameworks, I'm not sure how we're ever going to get ahead with making a crack in really creating affordable and more housing for our community. So that's which way I'll be leaning.
Thank you, Councillor.
And sorry, just to add to that, because there was a comment in terms of Yonge Street and not seeing similar sized buildings, I do want to point out 681 Yonge Street has 7 stories, 669 Yonge Street, approved 4 weeks ago, has 11 stories. So again, I do think we have to put in perspective, and if you haven't driven by the area, before we have next council meeting, I suggest you do and actually do look at what's built up already and what's to come in that area as well, because I think it is also setting a precedent for the direction that we're heading.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. We'll go to Councillor Harvie, then Councillor Morales.
Great, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Question for through you to Ms. Banfield. I know it's been quite some time, and it actually predates me on council. But when was Yonge Street, and Essa Road, and Bayfield? And I know at one point we had 5 intensification corridors. Now we're down to 3. But roughly what year was it that Yonge Street, Essa Road, and stuff were designated as intensification corridors?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harvie. So the work actually began like around 2010, approved around 2014, and then in place in 2015. So it also predates my time at the city as well. But what's important is that the policy interpretation has been consistent in terms of how we calculate density, and so that's been consistent this whole time, and as I said, with other planning directors as well. In 2020, around the time when I was director, we started doing the density analysis as part of the staff report to kind of show when we're talking about density how it impacts around the community. But these policies have been in place, as I said, for almost 10 years now.
Great, thank you. And just a follow up to that, the density that's being proposed for this application, when I look at this application, I find that it resembles a lot of what I'm seeing on Essa Road in my ward. And is this intensification level out of whack when it comes to the other projects that we've been seeing being proposed on other intensification corridors, for example, Essa Road, that I obviously know quite well?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harvie, absolutely not. It's very consistent. And again, on a per application basis, the density number does seem high if you're thinking that 50 is the target. And that's why we do those density analysis to show what else is in the area, what other sites have been approved. If there's an approved site, we include that in the density analysis so that we get that cumulative impact of density across the corridor as the policy is intended.
Great, yeah, thank you. If we kept apartment buildings to density levels of only 50 units, they would have to be massive units. I'm going to have to support the staff on this. As Councillor Hamilton had said, we've got policies in place. This one really resembles what I see on Essa Road. And I know the one resident that reached out to me there on Monday, and I kind of went through the way that we have to look at things as councillors when it comes to a policy. And also, too, if we were to shoot this thing down and vote against it, what's our chances of winning at LPAT? And when I look at this, our chances of winning at LPAT are 0. And potentially at LPAT, you're going to come back and they're going to be awarded an 8-story building opposed to a 7-story building. And we've already seen that happen on Essa Road. And that's why I highlighted Essa Road when I'm speaking about it, because I want to make sure that we don't make a bad decision that makes a project that people don't like now even worse down the road. We're dealing with fairly significant setbacks. One side of the building is 20 meters, and then when you get further in where the parking lot is, it's a 36-meter setback, which is much more significant than the application that we just actually had at our public meeting here at 6 o'clock for another building on Essa Road in my ward. There's ways to obviously counteract some of the privacy issues, whether it's adding additional trees along that fence line opposed to trying to build bigger fences because we cap it at 7 feet anyway. But I'm going to have to vote in favor of the staff's recommendations for those reasons, because I really feel that if we vote against this, we're potentially going to see something way worse down the road. Thank you. Those are my comments.
I have Councillor Morales and Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Very quick question. It can be a simple yes or no to Councillor Reitma through you, Mayor Nuttall. Councillor Reitma, would you support 4 stories on an intensification corridor?
I don't know. Are you asking me a planning opinion? I mean, it depends on the circumstances, of course.
Okay.
I'll defer to staff.
No, it was meant for you, but that's all right. You don't have to answer it. Mayor Nuttall, the reason I asked that question specifically is I don't have blinders on when I say my comments. I listened very intently to all the people around me. They're dedicated individuals. Like, I speak off the cuff. Look at my colleague here. He has a book. He has notes. Meticulous. I've never done that. I write them on my phone and I talk for good or for bad, but I'm here a third time, so I'm going to be doing something right in my ward. And great questions from Councillor Harvie. My point being, the reason I asked that question is, one thing is what's being said, but another thing is what's being done. And I say this respectfully and objectively only. Councillor Reitma, you said that there's places for growth to happen in the right areas with the right context in the downtown. I recall, and Mayor Nuttall, you weren't around at the time, but you may be aware, the Bradford property, also known as the Smart Centers property, Councillor Reitma, you voted against that. If there is a place where density should go, which is downtown, and I know you voted for other files, but I just need to stay consistent on this because we're having a very respectful, objective conversation is, again, you voted against that, yet the comments were that density can also go downtown.
Point of order.
Yes, Councillor.
Just to seek clarification through you, Mayor Nuttall, and the point of the conversation feels like it's more challenging one member's opinion that's gone to a personal conversation of their voting history, and I don't believe it's part of the matter of the agenda. So I just want to see through you. I want to check in around the lens of the conversation and questioning of Councillor Reitma by Councillor Morales.
Councillor Morales, do you have any other questions for Councillor Reitma?
Nope, I do not.
Can you bring this to a close?
Yep, I don't have any questions for Councillor Reitma more. I do have a question for Ms. Banfield quickly. Ms. Banfield, there's been some comments that have been communicated to me by members of Ward 8 about there being that the average of a corridor should be roughly around 50 units per hectare. Is that statement in our current official plan? Through you, Mayor Nuttall.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Morales. It is not, but this application is subject to the old official plan based on the timing of the application.
Perfect. And the other question, Mayor Nuttall, is it was a great point by Deputy Mayor Thompson. There was a building downtown that along Kempfeld Drive, the density went down, but there's actually like only about 4 or 2 condos per floor. It was kind of a special file. So that's a further example on when density, you can get units down, but you're not necessarily getting the built form down. Is that accurate, Ms. Banfield?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Morales, that is accurate. As I said, the built form is one piece, and the density is obviously based on the number of units. So in that case, you're talking about something that came in wanting to be a luxury condominium building to have very, very big units.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ms. Banfield. And to kind of close this up here, if we're going to build the community that we talk about, we need to build housing for that community to live in. It's really that simple. I wasn't going to say this point, but Councillor Harvie, Mayor Nuttall brought up a great point about careful what you wish for with appeal boards. For context purposes, the 7-story building that got built in Ward 9, the one that we keep referencing, 681, that was supposed to be commercial, the drive-through and a small retail unit. Council denied that. It went to arbitration. I'm not going to go into detail specifically, but there was an expectation, I can say that, that it likely could have been townhouses on Yonge Street there. And the reality was that the settlement that is now a built building, so I can describe the building, is a 7-story building. So that reality that Councillor Harvie said is really strong. Either careful what you wish for, because it might be more height, but then again, wishing for more of our residents to have housing options of all ages. I think is a positive thing. I also did the drive-by, as Councillor Hamilton did. I didn't do any door knocks because, and I wanted to say this to Councillor Harris, you didn't say you did any door knocks, but I would never, Mayor Nuttall, undermine the great work that my colleague, Councillor Jim Harris, does in his ward. He is a respected individual and a respected advocate for his ward. I know I lean on him sometimes to calm myself down and stay objective to the path, and I know you have worked on this file extensively hard, so I just want to conclude by commending you on your work, and also be voting in favor of it and respect you as a colleague.
Thank you, Councilor Morales. Councilor Harris.
Hey, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Thank you, Councilor Morales. And thank you to the members of council who've weighed in on this. A lot of great comments, and certainly appreciate the different perspectives and details. Just wanted to maybe through you, Mayor Nuttall, just ask a couple questions of clarification. I know they're in the report, but for those who are watching and those who made the effort to come tonight, Ms. Banfield, am I correct that the target density for an intensification node is 50 to 120 units per hectare? Is that based on the?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harris. So the older intensification policy had nodes and corridors. Yeah. So the corridor was 50 and the nodes were 120. Nodes were like intersections. So the idea that would be kind of more intense, and then the corridor. So that's the range, correct.
Right. And I know, again, it's in the report, and just for clarity and for those who may not have seen the detail, this particular application is being judged based on the prior official plan, not the current newly approved official plan. Just that's correct.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harris, correct.
Right. How does the aforementioned node and corridor target differentiate, or is it similar in an application based on the current, the official plan that we're currently adjudicating this on? So what's the old plan? Like how is that language generally interpreted, or that expectation of a target from 50 to 120 in a node, which I understand the node is expected to be higher density than a corridor, which is the target of 50. How is that generally applied with that old official plan? If that's fair.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harris, what I can tell you is that the wording is a target. If you think about when the intensification policies were in place, we were seeing predominantly single detached homes, density targets of like 10 units per hectare, that kind of thing. So at that point, the stretch goal, if you will, was up to 50 and up to 21, as I said, as a target. Again, through the expecting that as things developed over time, the overall density would increase. But that's essentially that it's, as I said, a target as opposed to a maximum.
Okay, thank you. And I know it's been mentioned, and rightfully so, and thank you, Councillor Corser, that every application is judged on its unique merits. And having said that, there's pros and cons to everything, but I'll ask the question anyway. With regard to corridors and targets, how does it at all impact the assessment of an application when a corridor may be at or above the target densities?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harris, we actually haven't come across that yet. The intensification projects along the existing corridors, Essa and Yonge Street, even though we've got applications that are cumulative, and that's why we've started doing the density analysis to kind of show actually how these applications are impacting the density. So at this point, I think in this project, it's around mid-30s units per hectare across this corridor in this neighborhood. So we actually haven't reached where it's been above that. If we did, then again, we'd be taking a look at each application and potentially be looking at reducing density or what have you. Staff look at this for every application, and again, at this point, we haven't gotten to that yet.
Okay, thank you. Again, with each application having its own unique features, one of the unique features, and those of you, thank you for having driven the neighborhood, and you probably didn't get the opportunity to stand in a backyard on Tomlin Crescent, but you will recognize that there's a significant change in grade. It's not a flat property. through you again, Mayor Nuttall, can you describe how the grade, the slant towards Tomlin and particularly Tomlin, because it's actually most stark in Tomlin, how that is factored, or if that's factored into the assessment of the 7 stories and the setbacks and this application?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, I'm going to have Tyler Butler, the planner, respond to that question.
Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Jim Harris. In this case, the urban design guidelines and the zoning bylaw provisions themselves apply angular planes, and we had the applicant revise their angular plane analysis to account for a grade change. So through that, the 7 stories meets the policies of the urban design guidelines and the zoning, so that's how we would account for it.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate, and I had the same concern, and I know, obviously, Councillor Harvie, you mentioned the LPAT, I call it that too, but I know it's OLT now. I think that's the correct term. The caution, the concern, and you've had many of these density-related proposals in your areas, you noted on Essa Road. And the residents, this is a well-informed group of residents, and they are quite aware of the process and where this could go. Just for the benefit of council, and as I ask you to consider the interests of the residents in this particular application, where obviously we know there's lots of interest, including the greater community interest, and as well stated by Councillor Hamilton, about the need for housing. We have an availability crisis and an affordability crisis. Both exist. Not every proposal can manage both. It's great when they do. But the residents are not concerned and are confident that should this be turned down, that the risk is not there for them, as you've kindly stated for an appeal to the OLT. So as you deliberate and consider which side of this you will vote, that's not a concern for the residents. I thank you for having that consideration, because that's one of the first things when I spoke to the residents is, where this could go, and just to, make sure that we're doing our due diligence, that this, may not get better, but they have that confidence and a surety, and certainly planning experience that doesn't include that as a fear in the decision of council. So I give you that information as you consider your vote. So thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Kungl. I had you written down and then I just skipped right over it. I apologize. Councillor Kungl.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I had a question of staff, but I think most of Councillor Harris's commentary and the response about us only being at a density analysis hitting the mid-30s across the corridor, I believe, Ms. Banfield, you indicated. So I'm going to reframe maybe my thinking on that to say, when we are not at the threshold, I guess, for that intensification corridor based on recognizing other approved developments, and so if we're only at 30 out of 50, if I'm thinking about that cap or target, is that considered, is there discretion on saturation of certain neighborhoods around where that density is actually occurring and in what proximity across Yonge Street? So for instance, when we think about volume of cars on certain blocks, or the intensification, is it loaded to one end or another of Yonge Street? So is there consideration, while density might only be at 30 across the corridor, is there still points of community safety or impact around how that is spread through the length of the corridor, and wanting to understand if that's part of the view of staff when these developments are coming in to say, okay, well, we haven't even met the target around density for the intensification corridor, but a lot of it's happening within a couple of blocks. So is there a consideration of the impact that has on congestion in certain areas of that intensification roadway?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Kungl. So there's, initially there's the official plan policies that, try to kind of have those targets for different reasons. Many times when applications come into the Development Services Department, many applications, as in this case, reduce over the course of a review. It's rare for them to increase in unit counts. And then all of the supporting studies that have to be submitted, whether it's engineering or whether it's traffic services, all of those studies have to take into account not only the proposal, but also other proposals, even if they're not built, and then obviously the existing development in the existing community. So all of the reports have to factor in all three of those types of development, and eventually, yes, potentially we'll get to that point where it's at the target or what have you, but even along the way, every single application has to look at all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I just want to appreciate if there's like a segment of how we looked at intensification along a corridor, but does it sound like there is? Okay, thank you. I guess I'll redirect my next question to Councillor Harris, and I appreciated your comment because my concern would be, we've seen the decrease by a story, which is at least some movement out of resident feedback. I know it's not to the degree that residents are vocalizing concerns. And so that was my concern, which is, if it does move into a different appeal process, it being a worse situation. Can you share anything more about the confidence residents feel in next steps, or anything more to your status about they're not concerned with, a future impact should it go to appeal and the outcome of that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Congle. Again, this is a resourceful and very thoughtful group, and they have done their due diligence and firmly believe that there would not be a problem with securing a planner who would support the case against the approval. So, not saying that they necessarily would win. They're not saying that, but they're saying that because who knows? But that is their position. Now, we're here at General Committee, and so, but the goal, the wish at this point is for council to vote no. And they understand clearly the path that is available both to them and to the developer, whatever the outcome may be. Did that answer your question?
It did, yeah, thank you. I struggle with this one, but overall, in general, just about more and more we're seeing resident groups feeling that they have to seek out opinions at their own personal cost to interpret or understand policy or see a difference in how we are dealing or treating policy versus other interpretations by similar professionals. And so for me, overall, it's kind of like, how do we help residents and the public understand what is possible within the interpretation of our policy? Deeper. So it's great to see residents engaged, but in these types of situations, I always see it coming at a cost around anxiety or angst or self-funding and whatnot. And overall, is this another example of a development process by which, is there anything else we could be doing from how we communicate or identify how policy is interpreted up front that could help manage expectations where we're going to see development, especially along intensification corridors? So I appreciate staff kind of sharing the policy and that happening over the past 10 years and consistency in approach and interpretation. And I'll respect the staff recommendation coming forward, while I do completely appreciate, Councillor Harris, the work you've done with your constituents. And the avenues of conversation that you've created and access to information where possible. So I think you've done a great job. If I put on my kind of system lens hat from an intensification and from a process and from a staff recommendation, I will be supporting the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Congle. Are there any other questions or comments around the table? Okay, seeing none, I probably should have asked this in advance. It's probably too difficult to get the staff report up right now. Is that correct, Deputy Clerk? Is that possible? Could you go to page 33? I'm sorry I didn't give you a heads up on this. Kind of struck me during the meeting. I don't usually blindside you. Page 33. Thank you so much. So for me, as I went through this proposal, there's a few things that struck out to me, or struck with me. Number one, if you can see Bates there behind it, and McLaren Avenue beside the proposed site. One thing that it reminded me immediately, and it's interesting because Councillor Negussi actually whispered this to me during the meeting as well. It reminded me of a situation that we faced immediately, or Councillor Negussi faced, quite frankly, immediately on being elected at 405 Essa Road. And what happened at 405 Essa Road was there was a proposal that was essentially fought by the city, approved by the, then I think it would be the LPAT, the OMB or LPAT, it was a time ago. And then a few years later, the developer came back, instead of, I believe it was 4 stories, came back at 8 or 9 stories. And it took a lot of work. A lot of work from Councillor Negussi, Council, myself, our staff team, to get the developer to reduce from what then came in at either 8 or 9, 8 stories down to 7 stories. I would describe it as a political street fight of will that got us there, quite frankly. And I say that because I worry, even if the residents don't, I worry we go in, we spend a whole bunch of money, we go to the board, and it gets higher and denser with less setbacks than are currently outlined here. And I want to give everybody a little bit of perspective from what I believe. So first of all, I don't buy the argument that, oh, we've got to hit 23,000 units because that's what the province has said we have to hit, so we have to approve every single development coming forward until we hit that. I think that's a bogus argument. We are going to crush those goals of 23,000 units. We're well on our way. Having said that, we have to look at every development individually, what it means to that community, what it means to the city as a whole, what are the feelings in the community, and what are the planning principles and policies that staff have put forward that have previously been approved by councils. When it comes to my personal feeling, I have a unique piece on this. Just outside, if you look just to the, I'll call it the southeast of the border there, you'll see the creek, Lovers Creek, and just across Lovers Creek is Mill Creek, and that's where I grew up. Skateboarded down this road, Yonge Street, when it was 1 lane each way. Watched Inniswood Church burn down. My first sleepover was Mr. Hansen's house, who I think I saw a letter come in from, and still lives in the neighborhood there. And so I know the area really, really well. I only remember the sleepover because it was the first time I read Goosebumps and I had a nightmare. And my personal feeling is that it's 7 stories is big. It's big because directly around it, there's no 7 stories. When we move on from my personal feelings to the policies, like the policies are clear and the provincial policies are clear and the tribunal will be clear. And that clear is going to be worse than what's being proposed here. And And I think it's okay for our residents to say, we're willing to take that risk. I get that. And I quite frankly respect that. But for the city, I have to put my hat on as representing you, but also representing the city's interests in cost of going to the board, opposing our planning staff, finding a consultant to believe what we believe, taking that to the board, taking on the developer plus our own staff, and the provincial policy statements, and the city's policy statements that were set in place by previous councils. What year was this official plan and zoning bylaws passed?
Mayor Nuttall, 2009, 2010.
Councillor Prowse and I were on council then, so it's our fault, amongst many. But the reality is those, you get the praise when it's good, you get the opposite when it's bad. The reality is we have all of these things stacked against us. And I don't want another 405 Essa Road because I think it actually puts the representative of the ward, which in this case would be Councillor Harris, myself in a very, very difficult position to try to figure out the avenue out of it when everything's stacked against us. And I want to speak to the individual who's front row here this evening. And yeah, I know you were there. You were there. And I just want to let you know, we usually have a rule of no signs in here. I'm breaking our own decorum here by allowing them, okay? I can't imagine what it would be like for somebody to come to me and say, we're taking down your home and we're doing something bigger and better. Because to you, there's nothing bigger and better. And to me, there wouldn't be anything bigger and better because that's my home. That's where I chose to live. That's where in your case, where my business is. You know, that's the view. That's the view I want to walk out every morning, right? And so I don't know how to save that for you. I don't believe that there's a route to save that for you at this point. And I want to say sorry for that. You know? And next week we'll certainly hear from you and make sure you have the time to speak to us about it. And so I do want to make sure that we properly take that into consideration. But and so as we go into this vote, members of council, it's not an easy one. My election, I said I wanted to see intensification around transit hubs and in the downtown, in places where it made sense to have large intensification. That's what I think that we've seen the council approve on the whole. But right now we're dealing with policies that were set out, and we have to therefore adjudicate based on those policies. And I don't see how being below the threshold we have a chance when it comes to going to the board. So I thought about not saying anything tonight, but I think that you as residents deserve to hear directly from your mayor on these subjects. And we are going to have deputations next week, sir. So please do sign up in advance so that you do get your opportunity to speak. But I'll be supporting the staff report this evening. With no other questions or comments, I'd like to call the vote. All those in favor of the report that's on the floor. And it carries.
Separate report.
Separate report is being requested by Councillor Morales. Councillor Harris, you'll be happy to know we won't do that debate a second time. We're going to move on to Councillor Harvie. You held DEV 042-43.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I'll put it on the floor as printed, and I've got a few questions for staff, if I could, please.
Yes, sir.
Through you to staff, not sure if it's Mr. Miller or, oh, actually, Mr. Gillespie's in place for Mr. Miller. I didn't pay that much attention earlier. Just wondering if you're able to advise what the financial implications are of this decision by granting the extension on this again.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harvie. There wouldn't be, assuming that this continued, there would be no impact on our taxes if the extension was continued.
Just a follow-up to that. So I know it wouldn't be a financial impact to what we've already been granting them. However, if we didn't grant them the extension, then I'm under the understanding that the lands would then be reassessed by MPAC, and they would be paying then the appropriate amount of money for property taxes, opposed to paying property taxes at an agricultural rate. Am I correct in saying that?
That would be correct. That might not be this year. It might be into next year, into 2024, but it would depend when it closed. Yeah.
And just to follow up to that, do we have any idea what the financial implications of that difference are then between what the land is actually zoned as opposed to the special provision that we've given them for several years now? I'm not even sure how long this has gone on.
Yeah, I know that they were, in 2023, the taxes were $8,250, and most of that was on farms, so it would be a proportion of that, slightly higher.
Okay,
I can get that. We can get that for you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And I'm not sure if yourself or Ms. Banfield for this next question. I'm not aware that we have this special provision for any other land in the city. Is this the one and only parcel of land that we provide this special provision for when it comes to having it assessed as agricultural opposed to what it actually is?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Harvie, this is the only temporary use zoning bylaw to allow agricultural uses. Correct.
Great, thank you. I have great difficulty in supporting this to continue. It's been going on for a long, long time. We have an application that's come through on this land. The rezoning has already been approved by this council. And by doing this, we're almost incentivizing them to delay development. Whereas if we don't continue giving them the break that they've had for countless years now, maybe that will incentivize the development to occur. And I have a hard time with the situation that many of our homeowners are in right now, that we're giving a multi-million-dollar developer a break on taxes when we're not giving our own residents a break on taxes. This council's done a good job at holding things as close to zero as possible, but I have difficulty in supporting continuing doing what we've been doing for the last several years, and it predates my time on council. So I would ask that my colleagues do not support the recommendation in this, and that this developer be asked to pay the appropriate amount of taxes for the land. And hopefully, too, that will also spur on the development that needs to occur on this property. Those are my comments. Thank you, Mayor Nuttall.
Thank you, Councillor Harvie. And Councillor Malice, I see if it's okay, I wanted to jump on this one. You know, Councillor Harvie, you just nailed it in the sense that how is it plausible to give one of the wealthiest real estate trusts in the country a break on taxes while people are struggling because of inflation and because of interest rates? It just doesn't even make sense. And I'm not sure how we look our residents in the eye and say, your taxes are going up X amount this year. You know, even if it's our partners that are approving those increases. How do we substantiate that and give the wealthy this break? It just doesn't even make sense. And in terms of incentivizing, it's standing still. You know, this is a corridor that we need to see developed. This is a corridor that has transit access, that is close to highway access, that can have some density on it. And quite frankly, I think that we'd actually be going against provincial policy statements by leaving this as agricultural. I'm unaware if there's actually any agricultural activity. I don't believe there is agricultural activity on the site at this point. Is that correct?
Through to you, Mayor Nuttall, it has been cropped, farmed. I believe it's had soy before and corn this year. So it has been farmed, and I think that's where they have the benefit of the different tax rate, is because MPAC has confirmed it's actively being farmed.
Okay. Still doesn't take away from the fact that we have to deal with this, folks. We have to deal with this. Councilor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. And out of respect for the mayor usually goes last, I'm going to augment your argument, not repeat it or say the same thing. So I'm going to take a different approach. I'm going to hold myself accountable as well. I cannot tell the Ward 8 residents, and I spoke a lot, the policy is the policy, density has to go somewhere, units have to go somewhere, we need to build. I cannot and say that and in good conscience then provide an incentive to not develop another piece of land that, as you described, is appropriate and in another end of the city. That would be so hypocritical. 2 smart centers. You may not be watching right now. Someone's going to send this to you at 7 a.m. Please build on Bradford Street. The city welcomes it. Please get some shovels in the ground. One thing, just because we say one thing about this is not representative of Bradford Street. So I just want to make that abundantly clear to smart centers. But fair is fair. And I'm speaking for myself, not council's decision. I need to stay consistent. I can't look at Ward 8 residents and say, yes, in yours, but not in another appropriate area. And we don't know what this might look. This might be commercial, this might be industrial, this might be this might be that. I'll let the process happen. I trust in the local councillor, Harvie. Harvie's going to do an excellent job at processing that when the time comes. But correct, I can't provide an incentive to not build something.
Thank you, Councilor Morales. Councilor Rietma, and then I'm going to go to Councilor Kungle. I think that's it right now. Councilor Rietma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just have a question of Ms. Banfield. If we don't approve this, I'm assuming that, that temporary zoning disappears. Does that prevent them from farming it?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Rietma, agricultural uses aren't permitted in the current zone on the property, either previously or, as Councillor Harvie said, the bylaw that just got approved.
So I'm even wondering why we're even bothering with this, because they're allowed to farm it, and then we give them, and this would give them a tax break. Like, it doesn't. To me, it doesn't add up. Why would we give them a tax break when they can still farm it even without this?
I think just to, Ms. Mayfield, I think you wanted to provide some further comment.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Rietma, I apologize. No, they wouldn't be allowed to farm it. Agricultural uses are not permitted. I apologize. They're not permitted.
Okay, sorry. I misunderstood. Thanks.
Councillor Kungle.
I don't disagree with the concept of, what's our loss when we look at the lens of tax rate. I'm going to look at this through a different lens. It still came through as a staff recommendation, not really supporting an alternative, because it effectively can be used, and it sounds like it is being used for farm use until such time a development is approved. So, without saying if we don't support this, it's going to push development. There's no incentive lever other than saying you're going to pay more for the property, and so don't leave it vacant, get going. My concern is what's the impact we haven't considered on a farmer who might be in agreement to share a crop this site, and someone knows there with income or property and timeline. So I actually think it's a great conversation. I don't know if the timing is fair if we don't have the full context of what are the consequences of us not supporting this. So is it now? Is it a year from now? Is there a notice period? Could we get more information to say, is there someone, being maybe a local farmer, who actually will have a negative consequence in the coming year because they need to replace the amount of this land with something else from an income. So I actually won't support it in this time without that information, and would love that to be part of the conversation is what's the risk to a potential farmer if there's an agreement standing to use the land for share crop. And maybe before I move on, if I still have the floor, if I could redirect that question to Michelle around, Ms. Banfield, do you have that information? Do we know of anything standing that would have a negative consequence for a local farmer or any farmer that's actually using this to produce food?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Kunkel. So just two things on that. As I understand it from MPAC, you have to have an agreement with a bona fide farmer. So what I would suggest, a couple of things, is we can certainly provide that, more details on that in a memo form before next week, before council meeting, and before council next week. And the other alternative as well is staff have put it in for a 3-year extension. That's the maximum allowed in the Planning Act. It doesn't have to be 3 years. If council wanted to allow it for 1 year or 18 months, there's that flexibility to reduce it. But I can get that information with respect to any agreement from a farmer, and maybe that might help council with their deliberation.
I appreciate that. So in this period of time, if there is an agreement with the farmer, then I would say I'm not willing to go against staff recommendation. I'll be supporting the continuance, but would be looking forward to seeing the memo, and or I would be open to considering a 1-year extension to give a farmer time to kind of relook at then any obligations that may create a risk for them from income and from any type of basic income to support them if this is already something they've invested in seed and or planning and don't have an alternative for the spring growing season considering the time of year that it is. So look forward to those things, but right now I can't. I'll be supporting the staff recommendation to continue it.
Excellent point. I was going to ask, do we know, and I'm probably repeating the question, I just want a little clarification. We don't know at this point if this agricultural land is a working field, working farm. We don't know if it's actually being used in that context at this moment.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Courser, crops have been visible for sure over the number of years. What I was saying is that, as I understand it from the assessment piece to it, MPAC double checks when people say that it's an active farm and make sure that they have a farmer farming it. So I don't think that the details will be difficult to get before next week, because presumably they have that or they wouldn't get the tax rate.
Thank you. Sorry for being repetitive.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none. Before we call the vote, folks, this is not going to be an agricultural property long term. This is going to be a development property. This is not the good intentions of some developer to provide food to the city of Barrie. This is a hope to pay less taxes while our residents are paying more taxes. That's what it is, full stop. And the relationship between a leasee and leaseor is none of my concern, because it's not between me and them. It's not between the city and them. It's between the developer and somebody they've leased it out to. And they have certain responsibilities and actions that they need to take in order to maintain the property in the right standing of zoning, etc. And that's why we're here tonight. That's why we're discussing this tonight. So, you know, as we're looking at this, it's not just the taxation side. There's also the revenue side from who's ever leasing the property if it's being leased. And if we're trying to incentivize people to actually build housing and build jobs, extending this results in more revenue for the developer and less tax for the developer, and therefore no reason to build. I've heard many people around this table speak about the potential of taxing vacant approved lands because things aren't getting built. And This is that, in a different form. It's monetarily putting forth the case that we are going to incentivize jobs and housing, and we're going to disincentivize sitting on the sideline. That'll call the vote. All those in favor of... You put it on the floor as printed, right, Councillor Harvie? Yes. So the staff report and recommendations on the floor. All those in favor of the staff report, 1, and all those against? It's 9.
Separate report.
Separate report has been requested. I am obviously out of practice, and I believe I skipped over Councillor Harris, DEV 040-23. Did you hold a second item this evening?
Yeah, sorry, Mayor Nuttall, yes. It was on the floor as printed.
You'd like to put it on the floor as printed?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything you'd like to say to that, or?
I think you covered it. We're not going to debate this twice, so thank you. And I'm glad you got caught in that. We see it as one. I mean, it's really seen as one and one collective effort on behalf of the residents. So there's nothing to add from the previous discussion, but thank you for asking.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any other questions or comments with regards to the second item? There might be threats being thrown across the table if people speak. I'm kidding. Shots fired, that's right. Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favor of the staff report? And it's approved.
Separate report.
A separate report is being requested. Madame Deputy Clerk?
Yes, I have noted that.
We are through the business of the evening. We'll move on to inquiries. Are there any inquiries by members of council? Seeing none. Announcements. Councillor Kungle.
Thank you. I just want to share some good news announcement coming out of Sports and Rec and recognizing a resident that did work with Dan Bell and his team. And so I just wanted to recognize Susan McIntyre. And I know there's been questions, so I make this announcement to help get some word out, both to council and the public. We have just seen the approval of women's shinny at the East Bayfield Community Centre. So that's new around access for hockey for women. I believe the first skate will be on Monday, October the 2nd. And there is an East Bayfield drop-in schedule that has just been updated. Please go to the East Bayfield Community Centre website. I know they're quite interested. There's been lots of requests for about maybe getting women's shinny. So you've got it. Let's not miss an opportunity to get on the ice. Do look at that schedule and sign up. So there is a capacity number, I believe. But again, really want to thank Dan and his team. And I think just overall a recognition, because I didn't know this. But for individuals looking for facility time, there is a great online process anyone can use, and it's accessible. So you don't have to come to council or members of council to start that process. So do engage our recreation team. It's on our recreation City of Barrie website, so you can go in and inquire to request a rink time or access time, and that will be reviewed, and that would streamline the whole process to staff. So it works well, and I do want to thank Dan for looking at that in a timely way to make sure that ice was available for this season. So thank you for that. Oh, and
No
Junior.
walk? No walk.
Well, I'm still walking. Do you want to walk with me? I'm now biking. So in general, I would also want to just say it's great to see the hockey season starting, and so please do check out the Junior Sharks schedule. They do play at the East Bayfield Community Centre rink in Ward 3, and I think the puck is dropping at the end of this month, so we'd love to see Shark fans out supporting our women's hockey. So thanks for that and for the women hitting the ice this season.
Thank you, Councillor Kungle. Any other announcements? Councillor Corser.
I'm scrambling to get my notes together. Okay, so this Sunday, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., it's World Cleanup Day, and at Sunnydale Park. Join me and Clean Up Barrie and Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition as we tackle several areas of Sunnydale Park. And I understand that we are going to be working in the creek area as well, and I've always wanted to buy a pair of waders, so I'm in it. Should be fun. And so again, we're looking for volunteers, and that will be at Sunnydale Park, meeting at the Durham Parker Center at 10 a.m. on Sunday morning. Come for half an hour, come for the full 2 hours, but we'd love to see you there.
Thank you, Councillor Corser. Councillor Morales.
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor Nettle. I'm not sure if this announcement's for me or for Councillor Rietma. As you know, Mayor Nettle, I read the minutes of the Heritage Advisory Committee word by word. I always do. And Councillor Rietma, out of respect, you had just said that you're going to contact members of council about the utility historical wrapping program. The reason I'm bringing it up now, it's on the circulation list. So if you haven't approached me yet, maybe you've approached other members of council. But if you want to read the announcement on the circulation list, otherwise I'm happy to. But again, as you know, Mayor Nettle, I read these minutes word by word.
Well, shall we tag team on that then, Councillor Morales? Yes, there is, Heritage Barrie is really interested in doing more wraps for these utility boxes and traffic boxes and that kind of thing. And they're inviting all council members, actually, if you have utility boxes that you in your area that could use a wrap, are going to be replaced because that's the most efficient way to do it. And we'll try as Heritage Barrie to get some historical pictures. So if you look in Allendale somewhere, you'll see that there's a picture of what Allendale looked like 80 years ago on the traffic box. And we'd like to do that more in other wards as well. So if you've got some suggestions that way, you can certainly let me know, and then we'll feed it through Heritage Barrie. Did that cover it? Yeah.
I'll jump in a little bit more, but perfect. We'll do it together. Mayor Nettle, this is a really good opportunity, not just for existing infrastructure, but I've scheduled a meeting with the appropriate staff. I've made sure I've reached out to them, and contact that we all have at Electra. It's a community relations person, and I talked to her at AMO. We're going to meet in order to see if it's possible to wrap Electra boxes at new subdivisions that are popping up. So there's other areas of the city where growth is happening. It was specifically Ward 10, all the streets going into Ward 10, Ward 9, they're being built as we speak, and a little bit in Ward 7. There's an opportunity to, as Councillor Rietma said, do it cost effectively, making sure the wrap doesn't get wrecked, and now essentially adding historical heritage, which in fact, I appreciate heritage so we can get these wrapped in our neighborhoods. And I will let members of council know, now that I've put myself on notice, about the outcome of that conversation. And if we can do it effectively, I might even commit out of my Ward 9 Community Fund, if approved by the appropriate committee, the Finance Committee, to do at the very least half a dozen of these, just to kind of be the guinea pig and see how it works, and hopefully other wards can do it. So if for more information, the memo says, the memo says contact Carol Ann Ryan, Public Art Coordinator, at Carol-Ann, no E at the end, @ Ryan @ barrie.ca.
Thank you, councillors. Are there any other announcements this evening? Seeing none, I've got quite a few, so if you'll bear with me through these. The hang tag waterfront passes will expire December 31st, 2023. Residents can apply for a digital permit by visiting barrie.ca/waterfront parking or visiting Service Barrie at City Hall to apply in person. You can also call 705-726-4242. Automated speed enforcement is coming to the City of Barrie. The signs are in place for 90 days coming soon, and they've been installed where the speed cameras will be placed. Once activated, the signs will be replaced with municipal speed camera in use signs. For further information on automated speed enforcement, visit barrie.ca/traffic. Curbside collection of textiles continues this week, ending on September the 15th. Barrie residents are encouraged to help keep reusable items out of landfills by participating. Visit recyclingrewards.com/Barrie for more information. Yard waste collection will now be collected weekly from September to November. Residents are reminded to sort all waste for collection and have it curbside by 7 a.m. on their collection day. For more information, visit barrie.ca/curbside collection. The City of Barrie and the County of Simcoe have partnered to present the 7th Manufacturing Innovation Summit, an event that connects manufacturing companies across the region on October the 16th and 17th. To view the agenda or register, please visit manufacturinginnovationsummit.ca. Culture Days 2023 features an inclusive and interactive 3-week schedule of activities. Culture Days is held in partnership with Downtown Barrie Business Association's Open Air Dunlop, the Barrie Public Library, and the McLaren Art Centre, taking place from the 22nd of September to the 15th of October. Residents and visitors are invited to participate in and celebrate Barrie's diverse and rich arts and culture community. For more information, visit barrie.ca/culture days. The Recreation and Culture Services Department plans several programming rentals and special events for the month of September, including the Canadian National Pickleball Tournament at the Sadlon Centre on the 29th of September. Game On event will be held at 5 Points Theatre on September 23rd, playing retro video games, participating in one-on-one video game competitions, and learning about esports and game development. For a full list of planned events and programming, visit barrie.ca/recreation programs. That retro video game might be something I can actually win at there. The next community safety, I actually still have a Super Nintendo I use, and I'm not even lying about that. It's a weekly thing. The next Community Safety Committee meeting will be held September 19th, and the next Infrastructure and Community Investment Committee and City Council meetings will be held on September 20th. I just want to repeat that. The Community Safety Committee will be held on September 19th, and Infrastructure and Community Investment Committee will be held on September 20th, along with City Council. That concludes all of my announcements. The one I'll just register for Bob, who's here today, are our numbers on units being adopted into the market in terms of people taking occupancy, and also our new starts continue to flow up. So if it's not online yet, I think it will be online in the next couple of days, but it's more good news. Are there any comments regarding items on the circulation lists? None for the 24th, 31st of August, or the 13th of September? Okay, with no requests, I will declare the meeting adjourned at 8:31 p.m. Thanks, everybody.